Members, I welcome you to this first East African AAFA PhD seminar. My name is Dr. Irina Lukenge. I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of Accounting and Finance, Makerere University Business School. I'm also the Deputy Dean, Faculty of Commerce, where the Department of Accounting falls, Makerere University Business School. I welcome you warmly to this first PhD seminar. I thank the PhD students who've endeavored to join. I thank the supervisors and those who are intending actually to join the PhD journey. You are welcome on board. Secondly, this PhD seminar is organized by the African Accounting and Finance Association. This is an association that brings on board scholars from Africa and from the diaspora who are interested in accounting and finance research and education. This association has been in existence for 10 years. And I think the president, Tevin, will throw more light on AFA. They've been the lead in organizing this PhD seminar. The PhD journey is usually a tough journey. It requires a lot of dedication. It requires a lot of commitment, and you need partners to help you along the journey. Among the partners to help you is AFA. It has offered a chance. For instance, we usually have a PhD colloquium annually. And this September, 1st September, we had a PhD colloquium where PhD students presented their work and they were given comments. Now this comes in another style still to support the PhD students in their journey. This seminar, we are going to have a number of presentations from the scholars, and you will ask questions. The session for questions, I believe, is enough to really express what has been bothering you, especially in the area of methodology and also maybe publication. We think that this seminar is going to help you a lot as maybe PhD students, as supervisors, as those who are intending to join the journey to quicken the journey. Next, we have something that we noted. A majority of our universities, especially in East Africa, require that you publish from your PhD thesis before you graduate. I think around 90% require that you publish like 2 papers from your thesis, then you can go ahead and graduate. We think that that is an area that also AFA can help. So there is a session of publication. How can you publish? You're expected to publish. And some universities actually go to the extent of saying you do not just throw your work anywhere. The journal has to be recognized. So we have a session of how do you publish from your PhD thesis. It will go a long way in helping our PhD students actually who have been maybe lagging behind, and maybe they are waiting only for that part, maybe to graduate or even defend their thesis. Lastly, I thank the presenters, Professor Trevor Hopper, Dr. Chalu, Dr. Mathuva, Professor Stephen, Dr. Sarah, Dr. Shaban for not hesitating when we invited them to come and present and add knowledge to our PhD candidates. Thank you so much for honoring our invitation. We feel honored. Lastly, I thank the AAFA Secretariat for enabling this. Thank you very much. I hand over to the President, Kevin. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Irene. I appreciate the opening talk. I'll be very brief. My name is Tirvan Subarayan. I'm a professor of accounting at University of Essex, and currently the president until 2021, president of the African Accounting and Finance Association. Irene is currently the East African representative on the executive committee, and she has made a very useful presentation already about AAFA, where we are and where we have been and where we are going. So I will just briefly say that AAFA is very much a Pan-African operation, a Pan-African organization involving academics in accounting and finance from across Africa, from north, south, central, west, and east. We have a governance representing not only these regions, but also diaspora as well as francophone. So we try to be inclusive as much as possible and to support academics as well as PhD students, especially in those difficult times. We already had an event to replace our normal face-to-face conference in September, but I'm pleased to say that it is the initiative of the East African, Eastern representative, East African representative to came forward and say we need to have more events to support mainly the colleagues in the region. But as we know today, there's a vast amount of participation from across Africa, and even outside Africa. So this is great to see. So this is very much a collaboration between also diaspora as well as African local-based academics. We're working together, and it is great today to have speakers that are working heavily in developing economies, such as Professor Trevor Hopper, such as Dr. Sarah Lowe, who are based outside Africa, but also to have colleagues based in Africa, in Dar es Salaam, for instance, or in Tanzania, in IFM, to also participate. So it's a true kind of blend of experiences dealing with methodologies in accounting and finance from an African-based perspective, as well as from the wider world. And that's what we try to do and continue to do. So I can only then wish all the best for today. This is a seminar presentation on methodology because Irene has explained the circumstances in which we think this is going to be useful. We do have future events in mind where people can present their own work, but that's not today's main emphasis, is more on presentation by. But there's also plenty of time today to interact through the Zoom on chats, and also open sessions, networking sessions across as well. So, and we also make a final note about our journal, the African Accounting and Finance Journal, which is edited by Professor Stephen Nkumbanya from Professor Stephen from Makerere, and who's also talking today. So this shows you that there's a kind of really big effort to also help students and colleagues to move on to publication as well. Right, so I think without any further ado, I look forward to the deliberations and to your questions, and also look forward to the speakers. Thank you, Irene.
I hand over to Tobias. You are the chair for the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene, for the introduction, and Prof. Tiroven, even for the background. I think mine would be very simple today. I will actually introduce Professor Trevor. Professor Trevor will take us through the session of research paradigms And just a brief, even as Professor comes, I hope Professor is in. Irene, you can confirm if Professor is already in.
Yeah. Is in.
Thank you. So Professor Trevor is an emeritus professor at University of Sussex, UK. He has been a professor of management accounting at the University of Manchester, HOD, and director of postgraduate studies in the same university. Professor Trevor has also been University of Wolverhampton and Sheffield universities. He has been a visiting professor in the University of Michigan, US, and ANS, US. He has also been a visiting professor in the University of Queens, Canada, Fukuoka, and Kyushu in Japan, among others. Quite a number of them are there. Of activities for students and has several publications relating to areas of interest in accounting, such as activity-based costing, ERP, enterprise risk management there, and has co-edited a number of books, at least 5 of them. He's also a member, he has also published in several journals, such as Auditing and Accounting Journal, and has several awards, including a Lifetime Achievement Award by the British Association of Accountants, and also Finance Association, and Platinum Award with the AAFA, and several lifetime awards that actually is crowned of. And Professor Trevor has been in the Hall of Fame 2016 in accounting of Who is Who in Accounting. Honorary doctorate he has received from Stockholm University School and of Economics, among others. So Professor has walked this journey of accounting. And I think for our students listening, you are in safe hands. I would like not to speak much because today is not my day. I would like, with those few remarks, to bring in Professor Trevor on board. Prof, where you are, if you are listening to me, take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for those kind comments. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Prof.
Right. I need the screen. 2 secs. Tevan?
Share screen, just click the share screen, please.
Share screen, right.
You should see your PowerPoint. I'm assuming it's a PowerPoint.
Yeah, PowerPoint.
And then, yeah, you should see it.
2 secs. Click, presumably. Right.
Yeah, it looks, it's coming through. Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, is that all fine?
Yeah. Yes, Professor, we can see it.
That's great. Well, firstly, thank you for your kind comments. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to address this audience. A lot of old friends in the audience, but particularly it's a delight to address PhD students in Africa, because you're the future, and the future is vital. So I've been asked to talk about research paradigms in accounting. Obviously, this is a huge topic, and we'll only be able to scratch the surface today. But I think it's important that students are exposed to these ideas and to some extent are able to defend which particular paradigm they're in. Very frequently, people are in a paradigm without realizing it and without realizing there are alternatives. So, to commence, can you all hear me okay and see the slides?
Yes.
Right,
okay.
Good. Well, firstly, what's a paradigm? It's a set of assumptions, perceptual orientation shared by a member of a research community. And firstly, there are a lot of different research communities. One of the things I often tell my own students is find your research community or your research tribe. They will help you and they'll protect you. But sometimes tribes can be at war. But that's part of the fun and the debate in academic life. And the paradigm we adopt affects how we study things, what we see, what we don't see, what research methods we use. Yeah, I don't know if you can see the cartoon there, but yeah, oops, I've got to go back. Yeah. Yeah, often people aren't sure what a paradigm is, and the little girl is saying to her father, or the father is saying to the little girl, no, sweetie, embracing a new paradigm doesn't mean daddy's been hugging someone other than your mother. Right, so, as I said, you've got to determine where you stand in terms of your own paradigm. And one of the things I put there is you can change. It isn't, you're not committed to a paradigm for life. Many of us have changed and switched paradigms as we've gone through our research career. But I think the important thing here is I've put this cartoon up here on the evolution of intellectual freedom. And it's really the journey of an academic from being a PhD student. When you start off, I'm going to research whatever I want. Then when you're on the program, you say, I'm going to research whatever my professor wants. And then I'm going to research what my tenure committee wants. Then when you're a tenured professor, I'm going to research whatever my grant committee or the funders want. And then by the time you get to my stage, you're not sure what you're going to research. So the point really which I'm making here is you're young. You've got to make these choices. It's not just a question of doing what is advantageous for your career or what necessarily you are told. You have a duty and a commitment to identify where you stand and what you're trying to do. So, why is your paradigm important? Well, your very fundamental assumptions about what you're doing, and often these aren't examined, influence what you believe. It influences what you think accounting is and could be. This is quite important because I would argue that too often accounting is restricted to conventional accounting reports and management accounting information. Personally, I'm not saying you have to agree with this. I would start from the premises that the most important thing is strategic development goals of the United Nations, which then brings in issues of participation, workers' rights, and environmental issues, and so on. Where do you stand on this? Second thing is your paradigm affects who's accounting and your research serving. For example, we're doing work on trying to increase the influence and political awareness of beneficiaries in microfinance programs to try and get you. It affects what you research. Are you going to look at how changes in accounting standards or financial reporting impact share prices? Or are you going to look at other issues such as government accounting, corruption, whatever? It also affects how you conduct your research. Are you going to do your research using large databases of financial markets? Or at the other extreme, are you going to spend a long time in an organization observing and perhaps participating in the accounting practices that they do to get a deeper understanding? And very importantly, it affects how you see the research of others. I'll come back to this. And to some extent, unwittingly to some extent, it will affect how you frame the reforms coming out of your own work and your ideological understanding of reforms. Now, I must admit here, and apologies if I'm wrong in some instances, but a criticism that I would have that I've observed in many African PhD programs and research training is that often they lack exposure to different paradigms. There is sometimes, I would argue, a belief in rather naive empiricism, that research is simply a question of finding correlations and so on between variables. I'll come back to that later. Right. Can you actually see things on the right-hand side, or are these cartoons blocked out? Never mind. Right, elements of a research paradigm. Arguably, they consist of 4 components. Ontology, which is how we view the world. Epistemology, how we should investigate it. Methodology, what's the best way of collecting data. And methods are the exact details of how we collect data. And by the way, if you can't see the cartoon, there's 2 professors there saying is, as a professor, I can tell you that only a fool thinks he's always right. There's no doubt in my mind that I'm right about that, which is a paradox, British irony. But the point is, I am very critical of people who believe there is only one way to do research, and that is the right way. When people come out with that statement, it often tells you more about them than help you understand the wide spectrum of research that exists. Right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through those 4 areas: ontology, epistemology, methodology, and methods. Right. Hang on. Right, I'm splitting these into 2 quite different approaches, which are on a continuum. They're not. On the one hand, there is the position that some people call realism. And by the way, these phrases come under lots of different words. So and that is the researcher views the world as quite separate from human beings and their interpretations. In other words, it's out there. It's separate from us. And we can actually see it and identify it as if it, in our research, really is like a mirror that reflects this reality. On the other hand, there's nominalism. And here the researcher believes that their interpretations or their understandings or the depictions of the world are entirely subjective and are affected by the personal lens through which they're viewing. Yeah, so looking at the cartoon, the professor suggests everything that I exist is only an illusion. I was disappointed because my girlfriend is stunning. But then that's interesting. Look at the cartoon and is she stunning? In some societies, she would look half-starved. Not attractive at all. Which reinforces the point that to some extent, how we understand and attribute meaning is socially determined rather than a single objective fact, with as many different multiple interpretations of how we view reality. Right, so let's look at ontology. Let's look at the realist, or it's sometimes called positivist perspective. I'm actually uneasy calling it positivist because not all realist research incorporates positive theory as enunciated in accounting, but I won't go into that at this moment. If you've got a realist in ontology, you see there is just one single tangible external reality. And our aim as researchers is to mirror that reality. And we can break it down and study it in fragments. But by doing that, we can actually build up a picture of the world that consists of a series of laws and fact nets. In other words, individual behavior is primarily determined by external factors. We are reactive. We're determined by these factors. And falsely, in my view, it claims it's descriptive. It's not normative. On the other hand, a nominalist, or sometimes interpretive approaches, it sees reality as there have been lots of different realities. It's socially constructed. It's socially constructed by the culture we live in. It's socially constructed in the way that we interact. So going back to the cartoon I gave previously, what is an attractive lady? There are many different multiple understandings and meanings of this. And the research seeks to identify what these different understandings and meanings are. And this research tends, it doesn't have to, but tends to encourage holism. So it's interested in history, it's interested not only on the individual, but it's interested in things such as culture or the political system. And one thing that's important here is a nominalist approach said, no, humans are not entirely predictable and determined by external factors, important though they may be. We have agency and choice. We can make decisions for ourselves. So the aim of this type of research is understanding, not prediction, and understanding context. And it also accepts that the researcher can't avoid their own subjective biases. So to give an example here in the purple, let's say if you want to look at NGO accounting, do you want to see, does external financial accounting to donors of an NGO ensure that the resources are spent as appropriated and reduces corruption? That's one way. You might do a statistical analysis. I'll come back to it. On the other hand, a nominalist might say, well, what's the rationale for demands for, apologies, I can't see the slide because of the screen of people here. But what's the rationale of demands? How do the NGO interpret the demands for external reporting by donors? I'll give you an example here. I had a friend who's a development researcher here at Sussex who was really disappointed an NGO that she thought was really good and was very honest, went back a few years later and found that he'd been doing corrupt accounting. And she was really sad, but then when she went back and talked to the leader of the NGO leader said, look, I had to do this because the funding from donors is very sporadic and uneven. So I've got to smooth out the accounting to make it appear so that there is a steady flow of funding. And by doing that, it helps my NGO to survive and therefore continue to do what was presumed to be good work. So there was a subjective interpretation. The corruption isn't quite as clear-cut as you might assume from just looking at individual acts of corruption. Yeah. Can you see these slides, these cartoons on the right? No, oops, I'll have to go back. No, anyway, never mind. Right. So there are certain issues here concerned with how we see the world. And by the way, I ought to say, I am coming from a more interpretive, critical standpoint. So just, which obviously frames what I say and how I see the world. Well, the first thing is reality has to be perceived. And this is an issue. We have cognitive biasing. We tend to see what we want to see and block out what we don't want to see. There's the issue of language. In order to depict reality, we've got to use language and determine concepts that language is supposed to be covering. Now, I was working with a friend, Norman McIntosh in Canada. We were looking at applying Foucault's work, which was written in French. He was using Foucault's work in the original French. I was using Foucault in the English translation. And then we often found that words that we thought were identical were actually meant different things in the different language. When I was working in Japan, one of the things I was constantly asked is, can we have a dictionary of English Japan translations of accounting terms? Because very often in Japan, there were no such words to cover some of the concepts. So language is I would also is, to what extent is reality constructed? I would argue often reality is constructed in discourses. And to some extent, this is occurring now. There is a discourse going on where I'm trying to change or make you think about how you view reality. And when we research things, are we really neutral? We've got to make choices about what we research. We have to make choices about which variables we look at. So I would argue there is actually quite a number of important ontological issues here. Let's look at next epistemology. Again, let's go to the realistic perspective. The reality is independent of and should be unaffected by the researcher. And in some instances, I think this is correct. For example, I guess like everybody else, I'm following the news about the tests on the COVID-19 vaccinations. The Oxford group hasn't published their results yet because they say they can't publish any results or make comments on them because it may affect the outcomes, which is perfectly valid in a study where it's easy to define what the objective is and what the factors and variables are. So I really said we've got value-free, neutral research is possible, and the facts are concrete and tangible. So we can identify and measure reality, and we've got the tools to do this. The nominalists or the interpretive people say, well, no, the researcher and reality are interconnected. It's almost inevitable that the researcher will affect the case. For example, the research results or comments that we make may affect what participants say and do in the future. They argue that value-free neutral research is impossible. And that's for some of the reasons that I mentioned in a previous slide. And that facts are human creation. I haven't used this slide in this presentation, but in a similar presentation, I give a slide of how people in Europe in the Middle Ages, hundreds of years ago, viewed left-handed people. And they were seen as creatures of the devil, evil, and were often punished and had sanctions applied to them. In other words, that was in the time, in inverted commas, seen as a fact which was humanly created, empirically very dubious. No, as we know now, but it was then seen as a fact. So really, the nominalists are interested in that reality needs to be interpreted. We need to identify the meanings and understandings of the world that determine how behavior and activities are executed. So going back to the example of the NGO, if you wanted to look at NGO reporting and corruption, you'd probably look at formal features in the NGO reporting accounts, look at their features, what they include, and then look at misappropriation of funds, perhaps on audit qualifications and so on. And you'd run statistical tests to see if there's any correlation between the features of the accounting reports and the amount of corruptions that auditors or whoever perceive. On the other hand, going back to a nominalist view, this goes back to the example that I've given. It might be what we perceive or label corruption might be seen to members of the NGO as legitimate acts, because if they reported exactly as they should, it might threaten the NGO survival, or it might affect its flexibility. Therefore, they may regard it as legitimate in these instances to manipulate some accounting reporting in order to preserve what may be a very worthwhile NGO. Methodology. Well, the realist approach tends, particularly in accounting, to work from large archival databases, but it could use experimental psychological work or even surveys, although surveys can be used in nominalist approaches as well. The nominalist or the interpretive researcher goes quite different. Observation, one of the best things you can do is observe the actual behavior and social interactions. For example, years ago, with colleagues, we were investigating accounting in British coal mines. We spent a lot of time observing accountability meetings from the pit bottom right up to the headquarters. We even spent time observing miners mining coal deep underground. And that was very illuminating. I won't go into that. We also conducted lots of interviews with the people, asking what they believed. And again, there was quite a lot of what was considered manipulation, or what would be formally considered as formal manipulation of accounting data, which they viewed as correct and reasonable, because it smoothed out the results and stopped external parties panicking or making false demands on the organization. And sometimes the interpretive research might be actually involved, participating in the accounting in the organization in what's known as action research. So going back to the NGO examples, as I've said, the realist might look at features of published reports and link these to the amount of audit qualifications, where the nominalist would perhaps observe, interview, perhaps even participate in the preparation of those reports in the NGO. Get very different results, very different understandings. Research methods. The realist basically seeks to replicate the research methods in what you might call normal science, physics, chemistry, whatever, into the accounting domain. So, and the belief is here that the research must be detached to avoid influencing results. So, we go through the standard scientific procedure of hypothesis, deriving hypotheses, finding measures to look at the key variables, and then to do statistical analysis of the results. The reason I put that little bit in red here is actually it's something which I think the realists in accounting research internationally neglect. Actually, most scientific method in the natural sciences starts initially from prior observation. Very often, a lot of accounting research, the hypotheses derive from publications on the topic in prior research. And I would complain that perhaps there isn't enough built on prior observation. Data tends to be quantitative, testing statistical, and the belief is that once you've got these results, you can generalize them to the world as a whole. Now, nominalism here is no. What you want here is grounded, more ethnographic case studies. You want to get as close to the understandings and the behavior of the people involved as you can. So the researcher gets involved in the site, and they accept that to a degree their participation and involvement might well affect the behavior of subjects. It's unavoidable. It's not necessarily desirable, but it's unavoidable because you want to get to the understandings of why people see the world as they do and behave as they do. You're unlikely to enter the research field with hypotheses. You want to keep a fairly open mind on what the issues and questions are. Now, having said that, you can't go in with just a blank sheet of paper. You've obviously, as an accounting researcher, you've got some issues and areas that you're interested in. But very often, the questions and the issues emerge bottom up from the investigation rather than a set of top-down questions set at the very beginning of the investigation. Or if there are initial questions, they may well change in the course of the research. Much of your data may be qualitative. Observations, but you may also do documentary analysis and so on. One of the things that I find when I'm refereeing papers, and I think there's often a neglect of this by people doing this type of research, there are research methods in this form of research. For example, now, a lot of people use Navivo to do coding of key words, key items, key events, to try and see the patterns and to cluster a series of concepts together. The point here I'm making is interpretive theory is not just a simple do a case study, do a few interviews and come out and make fairly general statements. There are research methods here. And lastly, the nominalist researchers say, no, you possibly can't generalize globally from the research. That a lot of what you observe and claim might be unique to that particular research site. On the other hand, if you get a lot of deep, intensive case studies, then you may be in a better position to understand and cautiously generalize. But you'll never believe that it's 100% predictability from these results. Right, so here I've given some examples of research in different paradigms. I'll just go through this very quickly. A typical realist one is here, was by Leslie Steinbantz, was the factors that influence adoptions of international financial reporting standards by African countries. And she looked at factors like economic growth, education, culture, capital market size, and to what extent do those factors influence the adoption of IFRSs by African countries. So 32 African countries in data set, and the analysis was of the data was done by logistic regression analysis. And she was able to derive some findings from this, such as African countries grow quicker and those with higher market capitalization more likely to adopt IFRS, which is okay. That's useful, valuable work. An interpretive study here is one by Dean New and his colleagues, and here it's they investigate how the World Bank use accounting to coordinate 3,000 plus NGO and other organisations providing HIV/AIDS treatment in Ghana. And they look at archival documents but used interviews. And here they find that accounting was actually very important to the processes of what was going on. It actually helped create alliances between the various people involved. But also the nature of its control created conflicts between some of these groups, which affected on-the-ground activities. So they were able to get a different understanding here of accounting. Right, I'll come to critical theory. Yeah, yeah. I suppose just put those cartoons kind of give a flavour of what, you know, it's, I think they're rather sceptical of a lot of financial reporting. The guy there is in the first cartoon, financial report. It's not all bad. We still have enough cash for bribing the prison guards. And the other cartoon, the guy speaking to the accountant, I know figures don't lie. Your job is to make them. And of course, the critical researcher is, well, this does happen in the real world, and our job is to expose this and challenge it and improve it. So, oh dear, I'm not sure you can see that cartoon. But, yeah, so critical theory here doesn't view accounting or research as objective or neutral. Critical research is strongly normative. It has a view. As I said previously, I would start from the view of, I think accounting is about achieving strategic development goals. For feminists, maybe reporting much more on having greater female involvement in the accounting profession, or they might be interested in things such as gender budgeting, looking at evaluating programs in terms of do they improve the lot of women. So there's loads of different normative stances. But it's also critical of the status quo, that basically it takes a viewpoint that accounting, as is, it needn't be this, reinforces and legitimates the interests of those in power. So one of the aims of critical research here is it seeks to create accounting that serves social and public interest goals, not just profits of corporations and capital market interests. So the emphasis is on critique and political change. I don't think you can see that cartoon if you've got that, but basically the cartoon is a critique of the education system, and it's saying, no, this task is equal for everybody. As a monkey in that tree. The issue really is there really equality in education, which a critical theorist in accounting would say is there equality in what is reported and access to financial information. would argue that to some extent reality is shaped and biased towards those who are already powerful. As a commitment to political change, they tend to be more oriented to interpretive and political economy approaches, but there's no reason why it can't use scientific and those involved and identifying contradictions and opposing ideas rather than finding or reproducing what is deemed to be a single what is the truth. And as I've mentioned, the tendencies to field studies and very much a holistic approach. And recently, a lot of the work in this area has moved towards discourse theory and participatory action research. For example, I have an ex-PhD student in Bangladesh who's working with NGOs to see how you may be able to use accounting and accounting processes to further empower women in poor women in rural villages and to get political change. Yeah, so there's examples of critical accounting research in Africa. I won't go through these in detail here, but there's one here, quite a lot of work, some of you in Nigeria will be surprised, on the role of accounting in corruption, particularly in government circles in Nigeria. This paper here is about how accounting was and accountants were involved in a scandal about an oil subsidy. And I put another one here from Shandana Alawataji about questioning really the World Bank's claims about how it's introducing social accountability and its effects. They're rather skeptical of this, and they are becoming argue, no, a lot of these World Bank reforms being imposed on African countries may actually mean that there may be less social and democratic account rather than more as they're propounding. I don't have time to go through these studies in detail, but just to point out, there is work in this area in Africa. Right, so to conclude, I've only scratched the surface of paradigms. It's a complex issue. I've also oversimplified much of the debates within and between paradigms. Within each paradigm, there can be many different and competing theories. Sometimes the conflicts within a paradigm can be more bitter than conflicts between paradigms. But as a PhD student, one thing that's absolutely important here is that you know your ontology. But if you go into the international circuit and try to hit the top journals, particularly outside the journals that only publish positivist research, your ontology may be questioned. And your ontology, epistemology, methodology, and research methods must be consistent. They must be aligned with one another. Now, I'm not saying that there is a one right paradigm or a one right way to do research. Your approach may depend on the research problem you want to investigate. And to some extent, what data is available. For example, if you want to look at how culture affects how people use and interpret accounting information, you're going to have to do probably a field study in a much more ethnographic mode. If you wanted to look at the effects of accounting standards on the implementation of accounting standards on share prices, and there's a good database available, then yeah, you'll probably do a quantitative, more positivist study. As I said previously, beware of those who privilege their paradigm and denigrate others. I'm highly suspicious of people who believe that there is only one suitable paradigm and discourage people pursuing work employing different paradigms. And lastly, and I think this is very important here for you PhD students, read widely. There's now a lot of accounting journals which publish work over a whole variety of paradigms. One of my observations of looking at some of the work on Africa is often students seem to read or are only exposed to research in journals adopting one particular paradigm, which is sad because there's highly rated journals publishing articles employing other paradigms which are highly relevant to Africa, and actually it's work in this area that's actually produced most internationally rated research on African accounting. Also, read widely. Look at other disciplines. I find I get tremendous insights from reading in public administration, development studies, and so, actually a field I like a lot is economic geography, but we won't go into that. Read widely. And I know sometimes it's difficult. You might not have access always to these journals, but as a researcher and a PhD, it's up to you to find ways of getting around this. The web is fantastic now, what you can access. Sometimes you may be able to get collaborations with colleagues who have got good access to research journals, and you may be able to collaborate with them to send you copies. You've got to use your ingenuity and creativity. And if you do that, you'll produce some wonderful research. And I'll close at that point.
Thank you, Professor Trevor, for presenting the subject of accounting, articulating the philosophy of accounting in a palatable manner for the upcoming philosophers in accounting. The presentation indeed confirms the profile that we read earlier, and
Juste une question. Pour les nouveaux administrateurs
and pragmatic kind of approach to accounting. And there is a clear invitation to the research world, philosophers in accounting, especially the last challenge that you have left this meeting with, that read widely. And I believe that there's the PhD students around and the researchers around, young researchers like us, we will take heed to this advice to read widely in the area of research. I do not know whether some would want to interact with Professor by a question one or two before maybe anybody.
Just one thing, I'm going to stop screen sharing. You won't lose my image, will you?
No.
That's fine.
Right, okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Yes, that will be fine.
Anybody think members are still digesting what you have taken us through, Professor. But I think we have a number of activities, and
Can I ask one question? This is PhD combines both qualitative and quantitative methodologies. One of my supervisors wants to know why I need to do the qualitative.
Good question. Well, one answer could be if you're doing primarily a quantitative study, I would say that there's a case for doing some qualitative observation prior to setting up your model and hypotheses. The other area is I'm often staggered by people who do quantitative studies, then get confusing results or results that they don't fully understand and so on, and then don't do anything about it. Why don't you just go back and talk and ask to the participants, why do they do it this way? It may help you to understand some of your quantitative results. Now that's coming at using qualitative analysis from somebody doing primarily a more realist, conventional, quantitative type of accounting studies. I've written, I won't go into this, I've written on triangulation and using mixed methods, and personally, I think it can be very useful, but it can be dangerous. If you're using different methodologies with different paradigms, you're often then doing research which has parts with quite different and conflicting assumptions. And it can be very difficult to combine these satisfactorily into an overall theory. If I do this, how I use, if you get, say, different results from a qualitative and a quantitative analysis, personally, if they come from different paradigms, I wouldn't try and combine them, but I would use them to compare and contrast different results with a view of how one may inform the model and the understanding of another.
Thank you. Thank you, Trevor. I think, Irene, back to you.
Thank you.
Trevor, can I jump in? Sorry.
Sorry.
I think here. Just wanted to, well, not sort of a question, but perhaps since you've talked about this whole very important concept, maybe you shed a bit more light. And I see you mentioned that a bit in your presentation. How would you, advise PhD students who are starting the career in terms of navigating between satisfying their professor's interest, which is important,
Yeah,
and actually doing that thing that, they're really passionate about? Because that's, to me, sometimes the dividing line between what our new PhDs end up learning or end up researching the whole of their career. Because once you've been set up in one area of methodology, you must actively find yourself moving out of that or trying to balance the world as you move on.
Extremely difficult, and so much depends on the institution and the views of the institution in which you're doing the research. Going back to one of my early slides, the researcher is a free agent that they can research what they want, how they want. But the reality is when it comes to appointments and promotions and things like that, you will face different opinions. It's a very tough one. It's something that the new PhD has to navigate and make decisions. And I think it's a question, I suppose, one extreme, going back to my slide, the cartoon, are you a conformist? On the other hand, at the other extreme, are you going to change how research is viewed and perceived? I mean, one thing that's often forgotten is those of you who are doing a lot of the positive accounting theory is the guys who introduced that were actually PhD rebels at Chicago who took on their professors and to some extent criticized what was then the dominant way of conducting accounting research. Now, personally, I have a lot of disagreements with those guys and positive theory, but I will give them credit. They were successful and they changed things, not necessarily for the better, but they did change things. So it's the tough ask. And to some extent, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. You've got to find out what research tribe you're in, and then which departments and which universities might be more sympathetic to your style of research so you can pursue it. But it's a political process. It's not easy. It's not easy. Inka, does that more or less answer it?
No, sure. You've just mentioned it clearly, and I thought it will be something most of our participants will be aware of. And it's interesting that also a lot of us here are faculty members who are also supervisors. So I think you speak to both ends. So, I mean, my approach would be supervisors being gracious enough to give PhD students the opportunity to think and pursue for themselves what appeals to both their philosophy and perhaps the research question that really answers to what they want to study, rather than, you know, caging them into that box of I'm in charge and this is what you've got to do.
Yeah, absolutely, Inka. And I mean, I've learned so much from my PhD students. I mean, fantastic. They keep me going intellectually. It's a two-way process.
Good point.
Okay, thank you, Professor, for handling the questions well. And I think probably the chats will still continue. I believe a good number of faculty members are looking into the chats and also helping the students in whatever way. Thank you so much, Professor, for sharing with us.
It's been a pleasure and an honor. And I think you guys are doing a great job. All strength to you.
Thank you and welcome to East Africa next time.
Oh, I love East Africa.
Thank you. Thank you. I think without much ado, I will now want to take us to the next level. But of course, I think I'm introduced. My name is Dr. Olwen Tobias, a lecturer at JKU at Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology, Kenya. I'm the postgraduate research coordinator at the School of Business, and we are in the Department of Accounting and Finance. My research interests happen to be in finance in the areas of asset pricing and corporate finance. That is where I undertake most of my researches. I would like now to move to the next session and hand over to my sister and a fellow academician, Dr. Evelyn Richards from the University of Dar es Salaam, to take us through the next session. Dr. Evelyn, how are you? Are you in?
I'm good. Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Tobias.
Pleasure meeting you through virtual means. I think the physical meeting is yet to come after COVID.
Right, yes.
The floor.
Hopefully it will come very soon.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
And thank you so much, Prof. Trevor and all others for a very informative presentation on research paradigm. And I think now we are going to have 4 different experiences from 4 different researchers on either we're talking of qualitative or quantitative or the mixed research methods, as the one question that has been asked by one of the participants. And I will introduce very quickly, because I can see we are behind time. I have 1 hour in my session. I will introduce the 4 panelists. We have Dr. Mathuva, Dr. Lauo, Dr. Chalu Henry, and Dr. Ngole. I'll start with Dr. Mathuva. I've seen him. Dr. David Mathuva is currently a senior lecturer and a director for undergraduate programs at Strathmore University Business School in Nairobi, Kenya. He also serves as an academic director for Master of Science in Development Finance program. Previously, he had an opportunity to work with KPMG in Kenya in risk consulting department and was involved in several investigations that cut across various market sectors in insurance, banking, consumer goods, automobile, you mentioned them. And currently he continues to provide consultations in the fields of enterprise risks, including forensic investigations. David has a teaching experience of over 10 years in academic programs, but also professional programs, as well as executive development programs. He's also a researcher and has presented several papers at a national and international accounting and finance conferences. He has also published in several peer-reviewed reputable journals and has supervised more than 30 postgraduate theses and dissertations. His research interests mostly are in the field of corporate reporting, auditing, which include forensic audit, as well as corporate finance. Now, before I go to introduce Dr. Lauo, Dr. Mathuva, can you just wave to our audience? Dr. Mathuva, are you there?
Yes, greetings everyone. Greetings, very happy to be here. Thanks, Evelyn, for the introduction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Then we'll have Dr. Sarah Lauo. She's a Tanzanian lady, but currently is a senior lecturer of accounting at Goldsmith University of London in the UK. She has a teaching experience of over 17 years in different universities. She started with the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, but then went on to University of Kent, University of Essex, and also Aston University in the UK. And Sarah also is a researcher who has published in several reputable journals, including Critical Perspectives in Accounting, Journal of Money Laundering, and Journal of Financial Crime, just to mention the few. Currently, she's one among the editorial board members of Advances in Environmental Accounting and Management Journal, as well as Sustainability Journal. Her research interest seeks to provide an understanding as to why social accounting has been done the way it has been doing now, but also looking at the possible ways of doing it differently in order to create a window that will accommodate a voice for marginalized social groups. Dr. Sarah Lauo, please, can you just wave to our audience? Sarah, I saw you somewhere.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you, Sarah. Then we have Dr. Henry Chalu. He's currently a senior lecturer, but also the head of Department of Accounting here at the Business School in Tanzania. Dr. Chalu has a vast experience not only in postgraduate supervision, but also external examination of both master's dissertation and PhD thesis within and outside Tanzania. Dr. Chalu has also presented in several conferences, but also published in reputable referred academic journals. And his research interest centers on designing and developing accounting information systems in public sector, but also accounting standards and auditing, mostly in financial institutions. That is briefly about Dr. Henry Chalu. Dr. Henry Chalu, can you wave to our audience, please.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you,
Hello.
Dr. Chalu.
No.
Hello, hello. And last we have Dr. Ngole, Shabani Ngole. Shabani Ngole is a senior lecturer in the Department of Accounting and Finance at the Institute of Finance Management here in Dar es Salaam. But he also serves as the Director of Undergraduate Studies in the same institute. Dr. Ngole teaches in corporate finance, but also contemporary issues in accounting theories, just to mention the few. And his research areas include the issues related to IFRS, that is International Financial Reporting Standards, international accounting, capital markets, as well as corporate governance and accounting. He also have interests on culture and accounting. Dr. Ngole also have several publications in both local and international journals. Dr. Ngole, can you please wave to our participants? I can see you somewhere here. Unmute your mic.
Hello, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Those are our 4 panelists. And I would like to give each of you a maximum of 8 to 10 minutes to share with the audience your experience on research methodologies, first as a researcher, because you are good researchers, but you're also supervisors. And some of you, you have also done moderation and external examination of thesis in different universities. So you have across cases to compare with. So we'll start with Dr. Mathuva, who will share with us on the specifically on quantitative research. Dr. Mathuva, you have 8 minutes maximum.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Evelyn, for the invitation, and greetings, everyone. Very happy to be in this forum today. I'll be speaking a little bit about the quantitative research approach. Personally, I normally say I'm a self-declared quantitative kind of researcher. Anything that does not have numbers, I kind of struggle a bit to make sense out of it. But you realize, I mean, it's just an orientation I have, tried to, engage in. So I have only 2 slides here, Evelyn, if you allow me just to share my thoughts. One of the slides is just talking about quantitative research in general. And then the other slide is talking about my personal experiences as a researcher, as an examiner at PhD level, and also as a reviewer of a number of journals, one of them being the Journal of Accounting in Emerging Economies, as well as the African Accounting and Finance Journal, where I sit in the editorial board. Now, very happy to, reflect on the things that were shared by Professor Trevor earlier. And one of the things that he talked about is the being open-minded in what you're doing. You realize that with research, we are exploring things. You can never be sure. You can never be too sure as to what the outcome will be. And that goes even with quantitative kind of research. Whenever you have your data set there, whatever data you have, you don't know what the outcome will be. And that is what happens. Ideally, if you knew what the outcome would be, I'm not so sure whether there's any research really or contribution you may want to make from that. Well, you may agree or disagree with me, but it's like you are exploring things. And many a time we try to compare quantitative research with qualitative research. But as I said, I'll only focus on the quantitative side of things. My colleagues here will talk a little bit about the other side of it. And I think Dr. Chalu and Dr. Ngole will now give us the mix of the two. When it comes to quantitative research, we are looking at data in a numerical form, right? I mean, it's numbers. And we are accountants and finance people here. You know, 2 is greater than 1, all right? So there are no two ways around it, okay? And you know that 1 plus 1, of course, they say plus God is equals to 2, eh? So as in, that's the gist of numbers. And when it comes to quantitative research, and we are here, we're looking at you've decided to go the numbers way. You gathered your data. You're trying to make sense out of it. But the question is now, how do you want to approach the analysis part of it to get that which you may want to, which you're trying to address, your research question, basically. So here we are looking at the efforts that you put into the data that you've gathered to answer your research question. And we are saying with qualitative kind of research, it will tell you the what. Of course, the other side will answer the why. But with quantitative research, it's like telling you the what. Assuming you've already developed your hypothesis, you're trying to test them, subjecting those hypotheses to some data set you've gathered, and then trying to do whatever analysis are required to address the hypothesis that you've developed. But let me start with the data first. With quantitative kind of research, there are different types that come with this. You might have carried out a survey kind of research where you send out your data collection tool, answering your research question. It could be a questionnaire. And I'm also informed you could also do an interview, which if you convert the responses you're getting from an interview approach, you can still quantify that and it still fits in the quantitative research. So that could come from a survey kind of approach. The other way you can get data or acquire data using a quantitative approach is when you're doing an experimental kind of study. Here you want to test some things, a phenomenon, and you have your data set and you're trying to test that. So you can carry out an experiment. Very interesting approaches I've seen being used in this space. Like for example, if you want to test the effect of a certain phenomenon that is either mediating or moderating, you may want now to have the pre and post. And there comes one of the approaches we normally use in quantitative research. We call it the difference in difference approach. But now for you to apply that, you have to study and look at your phenomenon and ask yourself, is that the best approach that fits in that? So that is an experiment. You might also be carrying out a descriptive kind of research, which you're trying to, describe certain patterns or behavior based on what you're seeing on your data. And still that fits in this quantitative research. The other one is now the correlational kind of research. I know many a time we talk of relationship, trying to claim causality in these kind of studies, but my personal belief and philosophy is it's pretty difficult to claim causality in a social kind of research, especially when you're looking at quantitative data. The closest we can come to is just looking at the association, okay, maybe between variables or among variables. So that is correlational kind of research where you're trying to get, variable X and variable Y or variable X1, X2, X3 and Y, and you're trying to bring this together and trying to make sense out of that. So that still fits in this realm of quantitative research. But don't forget, with quantitative research, the analysis that you're carrying out, we are trying to decide what to measure next. So whatever data you have to ask yourself, how do I operationalize the variables I have in a measurable way? Because with quantitative research, you need to measure, right? You need to quantify, you need to operationalize your construct or your variables so that you subject them to some statistical, kind of analysis. And let's say now you have your data set, all right? And as I said, beginning with the data, because you don't know what the outcome will be or how the results will look like, my advice, and from my experience, it's always good to use that funnel kind of approach to things. See if you can gather more data than you need. Of course, relevant data. See if you can gather more data than you need, so that when it comes now to sitting and trying to figure out what kind of findings you may get from it, you have many things to look around for. Okay, the moment you only gather 5 variables and you realize they're not taking you anywhere, you might have to go back and collect data. And I think there are quite a number of experiences which have been like that, where be it a research paper you had submitted, or be it a thesis you've done at PhD level, where you're being told you have to go back and gather additional data. Why is that happening? Reason being, you are too narrow from the word go. You need to be very wide. But don't forget, relevant in what you're trying to establish. So now, with this kind of data, which is quantitative, I talked about the measurement, because we need to be able to quantify so that now we can establish, whatever patterns or associations that might arise from that. Okay, and now the next level, once you have the data, is the analysis. And this requires you now, as a researcher, an emerging researcher, established researcher, as a PhD student, you have to continually educate yourself on the various approaches to analyzing data, especially in this space. There are so many, sources and platforms where you can get in and look at, how do I analyze this data given the nature of, the variables I have. But that is the next level, analysis. Now, what happens in analysis? First is choosing an appropriate approach to analyzing your data. You have your test variables, you have your response variables. You need to know, given this kind of data or given this kind of variables, what do I need to subject them to for me to make or get meaningful results out of it? Once again, I've come across instances where the researcher uses an incorrect approach given the data set. So it's always very good to educate yourself. And as I said, it's a continual process. Even myself, I have to continually, update myself in terms of the relevant approaches to analyzing data. Now, the analysis has a lot of twists to it because, as I said, you don't know what you will get out of it. So you really have to be open, try all sorts of things, play around with the data. But when it comes to analysis, you need to be logical in the way you are approaching things. There has to be a logical step-by-step approach to things, starting from the lowest level to the deeper, more analytical ways of analyzing data. So when it comes to quantitative kind of analysis and reporting of your results, it's always good to start with the basic level. Tell us about the characteristics of the variables or the data you have. That is a descriptive kind of approach to things. Then move on to more analytical approaches to reporting the results of your work. And by low level, descriptive approaches is basically where you're telling us about the mean, mode, median, the skewness, how your data looks like. Here, I don't want to prescribe anything. I want to leave things open. But what you're looking for is to understand your data from a descriptive approach. Then as you move on to more analytical approaches, you have now to critically think, all right? How do I analyze this data in an analytical way, a rigorous way, which makes a contribution to the phenomena that I'm trying to address or my research question? Because now that's where I would say the rubber meets the road. You really have to critically think, am I going to do regression? If you're doing regression, what kind of regression? Am I going to do principal component analysis? Why should I do that? Am I going to do exploratory factor analysis? Why do I need to do that? Am I going to do some cross-case kind of tabulation and comparison of things? Why do I need to do that? And that's not enough. Once you've reached that level of analytical kind of analysis, the next level now is convincing the other party, the other side, or another researcher in your field that indeed this is the way things will be, all right? Now, that is the more difficult part because you have to kind of tell us how robust are the results of your analysis, right? And that's always a very tough one because you really have to look at the data and the results from different aspects, but very critical. How robust are your analysis? All right, so that is just a quick and brief overview of quantitative research. And I want to move on to my next and last slide, sharing about my experiences.
2 minutes.
Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you.
And then you have, yeah.
Working very hard to live within that. All right, so the first one I think I've talked about, begin with a lot of data. Be open. Do not, lock yourself into a few things, all right? And with quantitative research, if you really want to get robust and results which can, can create or can attract the attention of the other researcher, the other side, the data set matters. The number of observations you have matter. The other day I've seen Trevor using a lot of cartoons, and I usually follow the PhD comics. So I saw them trying to, answer the question, how many observations should I have? And from the cartoons, not me, they were saying you look at the number of years you've taken to do your doctoral study, now convert that to number of days, and then multiply by the number of units in your, data set, all right, your cross sections. And whatever answer you get, divide by something. So, but anyway, so what I'm trying to say here is the number of observations you have for your data set matter a lot. They really matter, okay? So don't go for 10 observations or 30 or 50. Look for a wider data set. It makes, it adds a lot of, convincing on the other side. The other thing is be ready to interrogate data from various angles. Don't look at one side. Be open-minded. There is no one way of it. As I said, I will not prescribe things. There's no one way, but just be open-minded. The other one is be as comprehensive as you possibly can. So the question here is always, am I interested in a good adjusted R squared? There are people who will tell you, even if you get an R squared of 2%, I'm looking at the quality of your data. Or am I worried about the significance of my coefficients? That should be coefficients. So just ensure that the empirical strategy and the model you have is robust enough. How do you tell? Of course, we don't develop models from scratch. You have to borrow from what is existing, all right? So borrow from what is existing and try to adapt to it, but make sure that it is a robust, a well-informed model. I talked about the robustness checks. It doesn't end by telling us this is the regression I did, these are the significant coefficients, you interpret that. No, you have to think beyond that. And finally, how do I want to present the results, right? So there's nothing cast on stone, but there needs to be some logic or some logical flow in the way you present the results of your work. And with that, I have come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, Evelyn. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mathuva. And now I'll invite Sarah Lauo. Dr. Mathuva told us about the data, the nature of data when you are dealing with quantitative research, but he also mentioned about the nature of the questions that have been asked, and mentioned the issues of analysis and how your results should be presented. Now we go to Dr. Lauo, who now will go to the qualitative research. Dr. Lauo, you have a maximum of 6 to 7 minutes. Dr. Lauo.
Hi, and I'm trying to share. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes. Go on, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, though you are breaking.
Can you hear me?
Yes, and we can see the shared screen. Go on, Sarah.
Thank you, because you're breaking. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to present within 8 minutes, which I'm not too sure I'll be able to do that, but I'll try to present experience on qualitative research methodology. I often like to start from where Trevor ended, where Barrow and Morgan emphasized that the epistemological and ontological assumption often influence researchers' methodological choices. So I position myself within critical interpretive kind of paradigm. So it kind of flow within critical and interpretive. So in here, my starting point for me to discuss the methodological approach in qualitative research, I thought here, then we can clearly see how the qualitative methodology fits in. So you can see here much here everything clearly. We can see qualitative inquiry, then it's coming from the viewing, how do we view the world, how we view accounting objective, neutral, and unbiased, providing the fair representation of reality, or is accounting socially constructed. So from where I come from, position is accounting is socially constructed. Okay. And kind of use sociological theories, feminist theory, most of feminist within the approach, there are several approaches and methodologies or methods. You can rough and round view. Okay. So first try then what is the qualitative research? This is also kind of research used to understand, describing, documenting social life, understanding the ordinary way of living, or understanding the social reality. Is there anything out there subjectively constructed or neutral, as I said initially, which is objective, neutral, and unbiased? So from this perspective here, I view that the social practices are socially constructed, so shaped by socio-political, historical power relations, and so forth. So this interpretive, qualitative research here, that it involves interpreting or naturalistic in a naturalistic approach the subject matter. So it tends to study things in natural settings and then attempting to make sense and interpret phenomena in terms of meaning people attach to that such practice. So there is a deductive inductive approach, which is all debatable. Some believe that you start and then develop a theory again, which is the grounded theory. I start from a theory because I view theory as a map and a way of seeing things. Before you construct a house, you have like a map of how you want to build your house. So I often start with theory, which helped me to say, oh, I'm looking at this problem. Yes.
Can you adjust your mic? Members are saying that they can't hear you properly. Can you adjust your mic? Yeah. Go on, and then we get to know if members can hear you properly now.
Maybe some people need to switch off their camera and mic.
Yeah, all mics
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you proceed.
I can't hear you, you're breaking.
Proceed.
I think when some of the camera or mics are on, it they tend to interfere.
Okay, just proceed and we see if they can hear you. I can hear you clearly now.
Can you get closer to the modem?
Okay, I can't hear you. Sorry?
Can you get closer to the modem? Okay, forget it, yeah.
I can't hear anything. Let me try to call Trevor.
And now we can hear you. Proceed, Sarah.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Because I can't hear any of you. You're breaking so much. Right. So as I said, there's a debate between deductive, inductive, and my come from that theory, and then looking entirely on the approach to research here. The purpose of interpretive approach is to unpack the meaning as people ascribe to discourse activities or events. So then tends to build a description on either the social context, how are things happening. So look on the, for example, corporate social responsibility, how are these reports produced? What is embedded within the social responsibility report? Looking at unpacking the power relation and etc. Looking at the tension between what gets said and what remain unsaid. Okay, so it also tends to try to understand any social phenomenon from the perspective of the actor involved. So this is just a summary of it. So one of the key things that I thought it is important to emphasize here is in qualitative research, the interaction between researcher and what is researched, especially the shared empathy, the report often may affect the data produced. So researchers, they need to be aware of this, especially early career researchers, PhD researchers, so that towards the end, then it is important to make a reflection of the journey. As you finish writing your PhD, when you get towards the end, reflect what happened from the beginning to the end, the relationship you had with those researched, and etc. So this situatedness between researcher and researched often affect production of knowledge, which initially you theorize it as socially constructed, whether it's partial or situated. So in this way, then, from the way I see it, that qualitative research often present dilemmas, challenges, and choices which are not always implicated or explicit in the writing up. When we read an article, we don't see those dilemmas. So that's why it's often recommended to have kind of reflexive engagement with the research practice that is reflecting on the process you encountered from starting your PhD towards the end. So this is one of the key important things I thought I should emphasize. So then moving to the methodology, data collection method and data analysis method, I'll just try to be brief because here Trevor presented detail of the method. Just to touch across, you can use interviews. So in here, interviews are the common method used in qualitative research to provide an understanding of experience of people. So you have different types of interviews. You have open-ended, you have closed, or you have some kind of semi-structured interview. However, when you conduct an interview, you have to bear in mind one of the key challenges, getting access, especially depending on what you're looking for. For example, in my experience, when I was trying to get access to the mining companies, I sent my letter to Barrick headquarters, and I waited for 2 weeks. I did not get any response. So then you have to know the gatekeepers, and you have to find ways to get access, which may be problematic. So what happened then? You can either approach people who may know someone there, which is also called snobbling approach, or you can access people randomly, which is not ideal in that case. So in my case, I had to look for someone from the Ministry of Mineral and Energy who knows someone in Barrick, and then eventually I managed to get access to Barrick. So those are the kind of challenges you have to think about depending on the nature of your research you're doing. For example, you want to go and research on corruption in the public sector. So you have your introduction letter saying, I want to understand corruption. So obviously you get challenges getting access, but you have to be prepared for that. So another interview, of course, before I move to the next method, it has a lot of challenges, which you also need to bear in mind, which I explained earlier. They are where research and researched are not detached. Then you have ethnography methodology, where this is where you go and live with, for example, you want to understand how board members make decisions. You spend a lot of time inside the board to understand actually how they do things, how they make decisions, and so forth. So this is time consuming. So it has a lot of advantages because you get to know the real life of those people. Okay, get to understand their life experience. However, you need to have a lot of time so that to be there with them. And then you have discourse analysis, which often is used with document analysis or sometimes separate, so it can be part of document analysis. So in this discourse analysis then is about understanding meaning from document, okay? And then you have archival record, archival or document analysis, or some use content analysis, which is where I want to give an example here. So this document analysis is used both in quantitative and in qualitative. For example, if you want to know corporate social responsibility reports, you want to know what is reported. So quantitatively, you'll be looking on the number of times they've reported this cause. However, in qualitative here, there's a move towards what is called modified content analysis because of the criticism of content document analysis or content analysis, which is purely seen as a quantitative approach. As I said, it is also been used in qualitative research. So how much time do I have, Evelyn? In terms of data analysis, I'm waiting for Evelyn to come back to me. Trevor also discussed about different methods that you can use in qualitative research. You can use thematic analysis. So this is often from your theory, from your literature. So you let themes develop from your literature review, from your theory as well. And then this is the method I often use. I never use NVivo or any other method. Often I let the theory, which I said I start with the theory, then the theory is going to direct my analysis. You can use NVivo and other quant techniques, but within qualitative, looking on the clusters, looking on the patterns of your data, and then coding and etc. Right? So I have a passion on document analysis, which is archival document analysis, archival or content analysis. So as I said earlier, this is used in both qualitative and quantitative. So the key thing when using it in a qualitative research is to identify the unit of analysis. So what is your unit of analysis? Often when I use archival record or document analysis, I often avoid to say content because then content raises question. What do you mean by content? So I often use document analysis rather than content, which is both often used in quantitative research. So when you're talking of document, what is your unit of analysis? I'll be looking, for example, on NGO reports, World Bank, IMF reports, government reports, newspaper. So for how many years? So this is often a question you get reviewers, that identifying your unit of analysis. And then within the document analysis, then the interest is to screen for relevant contextual information or themes relating to your research. So in accounting, we have a lot of research using document analysis or archival record method, where they use it as a modified form, because the argument here is when you're using it as in isolation, the way it is, it tends to give you quantitative information. That's why they modify it, looking on the manifest as well as the lateral, latent, I mean. So manifest means looking at what the form of discourse in the report or in the document, and then you go to the second stage, looking at the meaning. What is there? What is invisible? What is visible and what is invisible? And why is whatever is said in that way? And why are other discourses silenced? So that is the modified kind of content analysis. So I wanted to, before I give you one example for paper to see all these, one of the key things.
Sarah, 1 minute, Sarah, to conclude, and then yes, please.
Okay, so one of the key points in writing up your PhD and towards your paper publication is what you put at the introduction and what you put towards the end. So as a qualitative researcher, often qualitative research require building a strong case. I'm sure it's the same for quantitative research. Building a strong case at the beginning to motivate your work strongly. So in the introduction, then you have to clearly problematize your research issue, work hard on showing, establishing the theoretical gap as well as the empirical gap, and making a compelling case for your research question. So in the introduction, then let the reader clearly see the problematization of the research as well as the problematization of the literature, and then also expose the significant current theoretical issues and how you're going to extend that theoretical issue. That one will also appear towards the conclusion. So in here, then I will end there. I wanted to demonstrate some of the methodology, but because of time, I can just send you the paper and where I have highlighted the issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I know the time is not in our favor, but I'm sure our participants have get good knowledge on the qualitative. Of course, at the end, when we have some time, you mentioned the issue of interaction between research and research may affect the data produced, but you didn't mention how the candidates should tackle that challenge. At the end, maybe that will be one of the questions if we get time to respond to. Now, let me invite Dr. Ngole. Dr. Ngole and Dr. Chalu will share their experiences on mixed methods research. We heard about quantitative and qualitative. Now they'll talk about the mixed methods of research. Dr. Ngole, please, now you have 5 minutes, and the other 5 minutes will go to Dr. Chalu. And then we'll see if Irene will give us some 2-3 additional minutes from the questions and answers session. Dr. Ngole, the ball is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for this time and for the chance to share my experience on mixed research methods. All has been said about the research methods, whereby Dr. Mafuba has talked about the quantitative research, and Sarah has talked about qualitative research. Now, here is next is now, how do you combine the two methods, qualitative and quantitative research, from the mixed form of research? And why do we combine the research? Clearly, we combine the qualitative and quantitative research in order to benefit on the strength on both methods, qualitative and quantitative research. And according to Creswell, 2009, he classified these research methods into 3 parts. One of them is what we call the sequential research, mixed research method, whereby the researcher elaborates on or expand the findings by looking one method after the other. For example, you start with the quantitative research and then you follow with quantitative research. And basically, this may involve beginning with a qualitative interview and for explanatory purposes, followed by a quantitative survey method in order maybe you want to generalize the findings or your findings. So we have the sequential mixed method as one of them, whereby you start with one method, either qualitative followed by quantitative, or quantitative followed by qualitative. That is the sequential. But also we have what we call the concurrent mixed research methods, whereby you combine the two methods together. So you concurrently use both methods, and in this, the idea is maybe you want to get the comprehensive analysis of the research problem, and it involves the collection of data of both methods at the same time, and the interpretation of information therefore gives the overall, you give the overall findings of the method. So concurrent mixed search methods, you use both methods together. And actually the research can embed on a smaller form of data within another larger data collection in order to analyze different types of questions. Let's say the quantitative research addresses the processes, while the quantitative addresses the outcome of the research. And then finally, according to Creswell, finally we have what we call transformative mixed methods. Now here, the researcher uses a theoretical lens as an overarching perspective within a design that contains both quantitative and qualitative data. And the lens provides, therefore, a framework for topics of interest, methods for correcting data and outcome or changes anticipated by the study. Now, within the lens could be a data correction method that involves a sequential or concurrent approach. So those are the three, according to Creswell, those are the three mixed search methods commonly used in practice. But then, all in all, which research method will be suitable for your research? It depends on your research problem. So your research objectives, research problem, that will dictate on which method you should go for. Either you go for quantitative, or you go for mixed research method. So it depends on the research problem you have at hand. At that point, I think I should end up there because I had only 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ngole. And now Dr. Chalu. Dr. Ngole told us why should we combine the two methods and based on Creswell literature. And Dr. Chalu, now can you also share with us within 5 minutes, what can you say about the mixed methods research?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, please, go on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for all the participants, and thank you for presentation from Professor Hopper. And it's very difficult to talk when Professor Hopper has already presented, but I'll try to add somewhere. But starting with the first on the paradigm, I just tried to reflect, because this is for PhD as well, on the paradigms. Yeah. Is that sometimes we tend to think that paradigms can dictate the methodological approach, but one paradigm can be executed either using both quantitative and the qualitative, or using one methodological approach. So if you are using positivism, it doesn't mean that you can just stick to the quantitative approach. Sometimes you can have a positivism approach, but use, hello?
Hello, go on. Yes, it's okay.
We are hearing.
Hello?
Continue, we can hear you, Chalu.
Yes, okay. Yeah, you can hear me. You can hear me. So yes, exactly. So the methods can be combined to achieve a particular philosophical paradigm. And we are saying, for example, when you are using the mixed approach, as Dr. Ngole said, you have to have certain characteristics of the mixed method. First of all, that it should comprise both quantitative and qualitative methods. And they should have a clear research design that specifies the sequence and the priority given to quantitative and the qualitative elements. So here is not just collecting the data, but the design should be there, and that design can explain what the consequence, which starts and which follows. Or are you going to take them together? And also we are saying there should be an explicit account on the manner in which the quantitative and the qualitative aspect of the research relate to each other, and the manner in which the triangulation is being used. And in essence, we are trying to say, when you are using mixed methods, we tend to look on from the pragmatism perspective, that you are trying to take the methods which can better answer your question. So here, as a Trevor said earlier, that you need to be open, that we should not be methodological fundamentalists, that if I have a hammer, everything in front of me is a nail. And when you are coming to the mixed methods, how do you arrange and how do you design it? Dr. Ngole said that you need to look, it will depend on your research objective. So we are saying this basically have three criteria. First, the priority which you need to have between the quantitative and the qualitative approach. And this will be a function of the interest of the researcher, the audience for your study, as the subject matter which the researcher want to emphasize. So if, for example, you want to emphasize the quantitative part, then you can make quantitative part to be more dominant and the quantitative part to be just a passive one, and the vice versa will be the case. But also, when you are going to implement, you have to decide which data to collect first and which should you follow. And the second one is, and the last one is the issue of integration. How do you integrate? How do you mix the qualitative and the quantitative, and at what point in time? Are you going to mix in the discussion section, or are you going to mix when you are doing the analysis, or at what point in time? So these are things which you can be able to make a decision. Now, then I think I have one point here to finalize, is that while the mixed method is good, as Dr. Ngole said, that it can help us to have more information to achieve both theoretical and statistical generalization, and also it can help us to best answer our research questions, but it has some limitations. And these limitations will require first a lot of time, because you need to be conversant on both aspects. And then, in some cases, you might find that you are not becoming an expert on either of one. So you need to take a lot of time to be conversant on both quantitative part as well as the quantitative part. But also it is going to require much resources. Now this resource is not only about money, but also about even the supervisors. For example, you might have a supervisor who is more competent on the quantitative part. So what about now in the aspect of qualitative? But also it's complex and difficult. So so those are just a few remarks which I can add, because I had a few minutes. However, I suggest to the student to read. There are several papers, but for the guidance, there's one paper by Doyle, Blood, and Bryan, an overview of mixed methods research. This is a journal of research in nursing. And another one, which is also a shorter version, which is also good, by Alson, Shorten, and Joanna Smith, which is mixed method research expanding the evidence apart from the Creswell and other literature which are extensive on the mixed method approach. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chalu. And I can see we are behind time, but I think if you can just give me 2 minutes to finalize this session. And one is to thank the panelists, but two, to pose starting with Dr. Mathuva. One of the advice that you try to mention is the students or the researchers should try as much as possible to gather a lot of relevant data, so that, you know, when they do the analysis, they don't face a situation that they have to go back to collect another data. And the question maybe that can assist more of our PhD students and other young researchers is, You know, what level can you say this state now is satisfactory? That is for you. And for Sarah, I mentioned the issue of how now a student can try as much as possible to deal with the effect of interaction between the researcher and the researched, because at the end of the day, using the qualitative data, it has an impact on the data. And finally, to Dr. Ngole and Dr. Chalu, you mentioned a good number of limitations, but you're not posing, the very possible way of how now our candidates can go about dealing with them so that their life becomes slightly, conducive. When you respond for just half a minute for all those, then I'll be handing it over to Irene for the next session.
Okay, thank you, Evelyn. How much data, how many variables are sufficient? Well, the answer to that depends on how the literature that you've looked at, because you see, before you collect the data, you have your research question, you have literature to work with. So depending on the thoroughness or the rigor of the literature that you've used to get the variables that inform your study, that can determine how many of these variables you need, because now it's the variables which now translates to data. You may realize that there are some variables you might have gathered data on, which you later don't need to use, okay, because of the way the data are behaving. So just to answer you on that, it will depend on the literature that you've looked at, plus you're also, the logical reasoning that comes with it. It's not just the literature. You also have to sit back and ask yourself, what other variables do I need to consider in this situation? Because we know literature can be limiting. There could be cases where you don't have everything you need. And there comes the research, because you also want to have your voice and you can try some of the things as you move along. So mine is just to say, do extensive literature, apply your logic or reasoning, critically think about the phenomena that you are, or the question that you're trying to address, and ask yourself, what else do I need to capture here in my data set, so that you gather data on that. And that's why we normally say during research, or when you're doing your PhD, don't spend all your hours looking at your computer or your papers and all that. Take time and breathe a bit. Talk to a friend, a colleague. Ask them, by the way, when you're looking at this thing, what else can you do? Visit ResearchGate. I find ResearchGate another very important platform where I post some questions there about all sorts of things, and people give their views. Obviously, as a researcher, you have to be careful with what you're getting there, but it can also be a way of, reaching out to many. Don't forget, research is not a closed door affair. It's an open affair. So reach out to as many sources as you possibly can. Evelyn, I don't know whether you'll allow me to respond to a question regarding the statistical know-how and where you get to equip yourself with that. As I said, it's an ongoing learning process. There are so many seminars, there are so many materials out there. Deliberately create time and do a bit of reading and looking for those kind of seminars which you can attend on research methods. Thank you, Evelyn, and sorry for extending my mandate.
It's okay. Sarah, can you just 1 minute? Exactly 1 minute. Sarah, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm trying to unmute my mic and the camera. Right. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So as I said, thank you, Evelyn. As I said, one of the challenges of using a qualitative approach is the research is part of what is researched. So the question is then how should you avoid it? So first of all, you have to be aware that there are biasness when you're doing qualitative research because you're part of the research. So one way, as I said, is to don't let your emotion, your feelings override your research. For example, when I went to mining, when I was visiting mining companies, I had already feelings that they are polluting the environment, they are doing this. So you had that in your mind. So be actually open-minded, because whatever you think is the case may not be the case. So I don't want to use the word objective, because we can't be objective depending on where you're coming from. So be open-minded as much as possible so that you can actually allow yourself, give yourself room to see things from different perspective rather than seeing things from your own perspective. And then kind of avoid leading questions to the interviewing. Let them, even though you have your your guide, also let them, give them chance to more and more, even though you have to be there to guide them. And then ask open-ended questions, which in a way, and then ask them to elaborate more, so that you make sure that you're actually capturing what you want to capture. But this is the biggest challenge of doing a qualitative research. Then this is what I said, towards the end of your thesis, you have to write a reflective kind of statement showing that, experience you encountered during this, how that experience actually shaped what you did and what you produced. For example, if I can quickly give an example, when I was visiting, I think it is Geita. Can you still hear me?
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. I
We
just
can
wanted to
hear
give an
you.
example. When I was visiting Geita gold mine, I get an opportunity to go and visit the waste dumps where they store the dead water. So when I went there, I took pictures. I could see spillover, and then what the people from the Ministry of Mineral and Energy were there for audit. Then I asked them. I say, "You guys are here for audit. Did you see what is going on?" Which is a mistake. I shouldn't have said that, because the next thing I got is the one of the director of mining company wrote to my supervisor then that I'm there to investigate. I'm not there for research. Luckily, I was lucky because my supervisor supported me that this is part of the research. So you have to be aware of all the dynamics and the challenges of the research you're doing so that you can address them. So by being aware, then you try to be as objective, which I say sometimes is not possible, as much as possible. Right. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Now I can see my 1 hour is over. Irene, if you can allow
Yes.
the rest, maybe they'll respond in the next session because it's the questions and answers. But just as a closing, I think the participants, you have heard the issue of reading. You have to read as much as possible. Professor Trevor said the same, and most of the 4 panelists also mentioned the same. Now, let me take this opportunity to hand the ball over to Irene, who can invite Dr. Maria. Thank you so much. Irene, are you there?
I'm around.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Evelyn, for handling the session. We are going to the next session of questions and answers. Dr. Maria, are you on?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Please take over the session. You have 15 minutes
All right.
within which to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I would also like to thank the panelists for these very great insights into various aspects of research, and also to the participants. I encourage you to put your questions in the chat, or just to raise your hand if you have them. But I already do have 2 which have come through. So the first one is for Dr. Chalu, which is about, because you've spoken about mixing the methods and how it's important to think about how you are mixing them. So can you give us some more insights on that? How does one know or even figure out, you know, this portion of my research should be quantitative, this portion should be qualitative, and it needs then to be sequential, or I need to do it at the same time, so simultaneously. How does one learn about that, especially because in my opinion, I think mixed methods is still relatively a bit newer than, you know, doing your research purely qualitatively or quantitatively. Dr. Chalu, are you still with us? Okay, if not, perhaps Dr. Ngole, if you could take that one, please, because you also talked about mixed methods.
Yeah, when you talk about mixed methods, what you need to consider, you have the research objective, and then saying to what extent you're asking to what extent you can do part is qualitative and part is quantitative. But sometimes you might do now that one I can not say directly that is quantitative. What I can say is you have the research objective, and maybe you want to use the mixed. The mixed can be used. You start with maybe quantitative, whereby you test maybe a field, and then you want more insight on that, more explanation. In this case, therefore, you do exploratory study. Then that means you of testing. You have tested the field, but you want to get more explanation. All in all, as I said, it depends on your research problem, research objectives, and the design. Now, the designing will be will also dictate the method which you that you want to analysis of the of your research findings. That is the concurrent when you use the concurrent mixed research, or you just want to get more expansion. Or you start with the qualitative and then say, okay, let's now I should get more explanation maybe by going to quantitative. So you started with the qualitative interview, whereby you generalize, but then you come to get the specific of the phenomena by maybe going into quantitative research. So it might be the first two methods, as I said, according to Creswell 2009, you might use the sequential, or you might use the common one, the sequential, or you might use also the concurrent methods for that purpose.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Ngole. I think that's quite insightful as well. There's a question here from Daniel Mulindwa, who says, as a junior researcher, I recently got an external pressure whereby the funders demanded me to disseminate the quantitatively driven results in lay language. Does that call to consider qualitative, or do I need to eliminate the figures? I think that one is probably for Dr. Mathuva. You could just, shed some light on that. Does he need to, consider qualitative methods?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Maria, and thanks for the question there. If the research was executed and a quantitative approach was used, I think what they're looking for here is you to communicate the results in a language that can be understood by others. You might have told people the R squared adjusted is this, I don't know, this coefficient is significant. No, now they are saying, convert all that story into simple language, which people can consume. You know, we as researchers usually focus on the statistical significance and all that. But we have to ask ourselves now, if such a request came through, how do you convert or how do you translate those results in a manner that can be understood by anyone who is not in that field? And I want to tie that with something I've observed with some of the publishing houses. I'll just talk about Emerald Insight, for example. And as you submit your work, let's say for potential publication or consideration, there's something they are calling kudos summary, KUDOS summary. And what they mean by that is you've done a very extensive piece of research, but they want you to summarize that in 2 lines. What are your key results in 2 lines, right? You look at Elsevier, they've also come up with something they're calling highlights of your research, highlights, 2 or 3 statements that, you know, summarize your extensive analysis and all that. So from my thinking, it's not like they're telling you to convert the quantitative to qualitative. They are asking you to communicate the results to the wider audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Masuva. I think that's a very, very good answer. There's also another one which has come in, and it has come in earlier, but maybe I'll address it later. Let me first go to what Michael has written here. Is it possible to integrate both positivism and interpretivist paradigms in a PhD study in equal propositions? Perhaps, again, that's for mixed methods. Dr. Chalu, I don't know if you can perhaps address that.
Hello.
Hello, yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I think before I answer that one, I want to add to what Dr. Madhuva has discussed on the how we convert your results or your research to the people for their lives. I think this is going to be very good for our PhD students to start learning how to write some kind of we call policy briefs or popular version. That how can you convert your research now into a popular version so that
sorry, Dr. Chalu, I think.
Yes, so as I continue now, is on the perspective of combining the positivist perspective, this perspective. I think one of the biggest problems is that, yes, it is necessary that always you can have only one paradigm. You can have combined paradigms, because some people are just arguing that one paradigm cannot only one paradigm to understand our social problems. So sometimes combining can help us. And the others are saying it's long even for our studies to say my paradigm is this one. It's about to the leader to decide that this study is anchored along this paradigm, or it can be mixed. And they're giving good example that in 60s, the Marxism people were talking about socialism paradigm. But now people are saying, no, those guys were not socialism. They are looking on the social construction. Different paradigms to the social phenomena.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Chalu. You broke off a little bit, but I think we've captured most of the discussion.
Oh, I'm sorry for that.
Fine.
I'm sorry for that.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. The other question is coming in from Asalan, and they want to know what is the difference between a research paradigm and theory, and often they find it confusing. So maybe Dr. Sarah, on your end, are you able to just quickly highlight the difference between paradigm and theory? Sarah, are you, oh, sorry. Yes, you can hear us.
Yeah, yes, I was trying to unmute my mic. So yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, so for me, the theory is the way of seeing things. How do you, the lens and map of seeing a phenomenon or a problem or a practice? Okay, so how are you seeing this, for example, corporate social responsibility or corruption? I'm looking at this problem from a Marxist perspective, or I'm looking from a feminist perspective. So that would be theory. And then looking at the paradigms, which Trevor explained clearly at the beginning, the four paradigms, is the kind of how do you see the interlinkage between the ontological, epistemological, and methodological assumptions? So do you see the world as subjectively constructed, socially constructed, or are you coming from objective kind of side where you see whether it's accounting or finance as a neutral, objective, and biased, and represent some sort of faithful representation of whatever reality is there? So, or are you coming from this side of subjectivity? So in that, then you see from Barrow and Morgan, or which clearly Trevor explained there, you have a functionalist, you have a radical, where you have the critical theorist, then you have the positivism, and then you have the post-positivism as well. So this is how I view it. I don't know if Trevor can add on that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sarah. Professor Trevor, would you want to contribute to that? The difference between theory and paradigm?
I think Sarah mentioned that quite well. It basically goes on your ontological assumptions. And that's where a paradigm starts, which just how do you view reality and how do you see reality? And that's often something when you read a theory that's not really discussed. It's implicit rather than made explicit. But then within a paradigm, there can be many, many different theories. I mean, I don't like to use too much jargon, but in an interpretive paradigm, you could be a grounded theorist, a symbolic interactionist, a phenomenologist, a discourse theorist, and so on and so on. So a paradigm is, I suppose, put it very crudely, it's about the assumptions behind a theory, which are often taken for granted or not articulated. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Professor Trevor. Yes, it does help immensely, especially if one gets stuck. I think that very last statement can be used as a very quick way of just showing a distinction. The other question which came in again, and I know Dr. Mathuba, you answered this already, but perhaps if you could just again elaborate a bit more. So quantitative research needs a lot of statistical know-how and what, and knowing how to go about it, I suppose. So how much does a PhD student need to know, or what kind of statistical knowledge do they need to have to be confident in their analysis? I think that is what one of the participants would want to know.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Maria, for that. And thanks for the question. I think, was it Irene or Evelyn? She alluded to the fact that we are all, continually learning. And my response to that is there will never come a time when we can say this is sufficient. You have to continually study, look out for activities, events happening, challenge yourself with the various methodological approaches. I've seen Olayinka Moses here sharing with us, a very interesting article from Accounting Accountability and, the Auditing Journal. And you'll find, different things being used there, different approaches being used. But just to be specific, there are many seminars that do happen, and I'm sure Dr. Maria, you'll agree with me. Like there is usually this global school in empirical research methods, forum, a very useful forum which is coordinated and organized by the University of St. Gallen. And when you get into such forums, you get to interact with professors from different fields, qualitative research, quantitative research, and you get to learn a lot from the different interactions. If you don't have that opportunity, there are so many materials out there. I personally continually learn these methods. For example, if I'm using Stata, I go online. There's a community of people who just, ask questions of all sorts of things. Like you ask, I have this kind of data set. What is the best way of going about it? I have this kind of variable. How do I go about handling it or converting it from one form to the other? So there is never an end. All you need to do is do what is sufficient. And what is sufficient depends with the expectations of your doctoral level of research. You understand that it's a highest level, I would say, in academic space. So you really have to be up for the challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Masuva. And I think also, just to put it out there, also Stellenbosch has a very good program. I think they call it the School for Research Methods. They have a winter school and a spring school, and they do in-depth. It's similar to what we've just heard from Dr. Masuva about the program offered in St. Gallen. So it gives you an in-depth view into various types of methods you could use for your PhD. So it would be worth looking at, especially because it's closer to home. Now, I think we can take one more last question before we go to the next session. And I think this one is for Professor Trevor. And the person is asking, in simple terms, what is the difference between philosophical assumptions, research approach, research design, research methods, and research paradigm? Professor Trevor, do you have all that?
I don't think I can remember all those simultaneously.
Yes.
But I think the essential point in talking about paradigms is all about your very basic assumptions. Where do you stand for? And there's a huge philosophical debate about this. And then I think it's a question really of a fairly linear progress of basically keeping all your ducks in a row. That is the methodology, the methods, and so on must be consistent. Now, let's say as an interpretive researcher or a critical researcher, I'm quite willing to do a quantitative study, but I would interpret the results quite differently. For example, I would be very suspicious of them being laws and whether they were able to be generalized, let's say, over different countries and different cultures. So your paradigm will influence how you, not only how you do your research, but how you interpret the results. I know I've not answered everything here, but there was a lot of components to the question.
There was. But I think also what we can do is we can share all the materials that were used, especially for referencing, and probably that would help inform people to get a deeper understanding of the thing. Okay, there's one last question, and I'm going to just give 1 minute to answer this, and it's coming from Placidi, which is, and I think probably, I think Dr. Chalu, you can answer this one. What is the relationship between data triangulation technique and mixed methods research?
Yeah, I think I'll try to put it in a nutshell, that mixed method is a method triangulation, and then inside the method triangulation, then we have data triangulation. So that is a nutshell, because mixed method is much broader. You need the design, the approach, even the paradigm which accommodate the mixed methods. But that data triangulation is one way of achieving mixed method. So that's what I can put in a nutshell.
Can I just make a quick comment here? Because
yeah,
there's a lot of talk about mixed methods. Method triangulation is not too difficult, and I think it's commendable. But I think you've got to then interpret the results within the assumptions of your own paradigm. Theoretical triangulation is much, much more difficult, and I would say handle with care. You really need a strong methodological foundation to be able to do it. Okay, I'll finish there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chalu, Professor Trevor, Dr. Mathuba, and Dr. Sarah. Thank you very much for answering all these questions. And I know that there's not enough time to ask all the questions. So I just would encourage, I think, the panelists to share with the participants, their research presentations and also their the reference materials, specifically the articles and books, which people can look at for guidance. So thank you very much. I think now I can hand back to Dr. Irene, who can then introduce the next chair for the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mumbi, Dr. Mumbi. I now invite Dr. Goretti. Dr. Goretti, are you on?
Yes, I'm on. Hope I'm audible.
Yeah, you are audible. Please take on the next session. The presenter, I think, has 25 minutes. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you, Dr. Irene. I'd like also to thank the previous presenters for the work well done. Our next presenter, in the interest of time, is Professor Nkunda Banyanga. Professor Nkunda Banyanga is head of department at Makerere University Business School, and he is a well-published person. He holds a PhD in corporate governance, but more so, he holds an MBA, BCom and ACCA, and he has published widely. And for his efforts in 2015, he was awarded, he received the Makerere University Business School Academic Excellence Award for those efforts. Professor Nkunda Banyanga is the immediate past editor of Makerere University Business Journal, and he is currently the editor of the African Accounting and Finance Journal, and also the guest editor for the Journal of Public Budgeting, Accounting, and Finance Management. Professor Nkunda Banyanga has authored several books and journal publications. He's a member of numerous accounting and management associations. He is also on the editorial boards of referred journals, such as the Journal of Public Budgeting, Accounting and Finance Management, International Journal of Corporate Strategy and Social Responsibility, and Journal of Accounting in Emerging Economies. Professor Nkunda Banyanga, we are privileged to have you this evening to talk to us about the topic of publishing your work at PhD level. Professor Nkunda Banyanga, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Goretti, for that good introduction. I would say kind words. I want to thank my my fellow presenters for the work you have done. And now I'm even shy of how do I begin after those gallant speakers. But I hope I will be able to try and handle the area. So before I begin, I would like to share my screen. I hope, are you seeing it?
No, we see your screen. Oh, yeah, no, yes, now.
You can't see it?
Now we can see it. Can you, yeah, okay.
All right. That one?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, thank you. This topic, publishing your work at a PhD level, I think it was hatched for, especially for the East African region, because almost all universities require PhD students to publish their work through their PhD work, from their PhD work, without which they will not be able to be awarded their doctorate. And I would say, even including my experience, that this is usually a very hard task. And that's what has motivated this kind of talk, so that we see how that task could be eased, what ways by which we could be able to make that task easier. First of all, we need to go back home, and what is a doctoral research degree? That's a PhD. So a PhD is a doctoral research degree. And we all know it is the highest academic qualification that most of us can achieve. And it takes a long time, usually 3 years to 4 years. And it is intended to offer an original contribution. So its focus is, of course, on original research, data analysis, and evaluation of theory. This may not be entirely 100% correct, but that's how I know a PhD. Now, as a former student, in trying to acquire a PhD, I was able to learn, or if you are trying to acquire it, you should be able to learn how to analyze theories and concepts within your field. If you are in finance, there are those concepts we know there. If you are in accounting, there are those concepts that you might have to find within that field. You need to evaluate the relevance of seminal meaning these are groundbreaking researches, current and emerging theories within your field. You need to assess identified gaps in the current research literature. You need to advance the body of knowledge in your field through original research, and communicate effectively to an academic audience and general stakeholders. Now, if you are studying a PhD or you're about to start a PhD, you need to be able to learn all these 5 or even more. But the focus of this presentation is on the last bullet. You need to communicate effectively to an academic audience and the general stakeholders. Now, we normally communicate by publishing our work from our PhD to a wide audience, normally through either you can write your PhD and publish it as a whole book, or you can create academic journal articles and publish them in various journals, which are published by recognized publishing houses, such as Elsevier, such as Emerald, and so on. So through my experience as a writer, as maybe a nascent editor, I have realized that most of the problems that we encounter at publishing level emanate from the structure of a research paper initially. So our PhD structures in various universities vary greatly. But it seems to me, from my experience, that the structure of a research paper may not vary greatly, but it normally differs from the structure of different PhDs in different universities. And for this reason, I thought it fit that we may need to, at a nascent level, if you are a PhD student or a graduate trying to publish your first paper, to get the very basics of what you may need to know about what your structure or the structure of a research paper capable of being published should at a bare minimum have. I would say that there are 4 principal sections: the abstract, the introduction, the methods, results, and discussion. Normally abbreviated as IMRAD. Now, different writers may add other sections. For example, literature review. Others can add study settings. Others can name it. But as you will see later, some of the other sections I have not included here may be subsumed within these sections I've included. First, it is important to recollect what is research as defined by various scholars. So one I have chosen is that it is a systematic investigation of a subject aimed at uncovering new information, creating relations among the subject parts, theorizing. Now that's at a PhD level. So I now introduce that word research and say, if we are talking about a research paper, there are 2 ways of thinking about it. One way, which has been widely used, is you may think about a research paper in terms section are more narrower than probably the beginning of the introduction and the ending of a discussion. I'll come to those in a minute. You could look at a research paper as part of a conversation. This I will also explain in a minute. So looking at the introduction, methods, results, and discussion as an hourglass model. In this model, all papers I have seen, perhaps the majority of them, begin with an introduction. So the hourglass model tells us something about what that introduction should look like. Usually, you begin with general statements about the importance of the area of study. For example, you would say that you want to see how important is the study area. How important is the concept that you are talking about? How topical that topic or that area has been, or how important or problematic it has been. Then you go ahead to report what is known and what is still not known. That is still in the introduction section. You go on to state the specific focus of the paper, which means if you refer back to the hourglass model, you begin to see the general statements where the upper side, which is a bit broader, and then it consequently narrows towards the specific focus of the paper. And at the end of this presentation, I'll show you how researchers, probably by an example, have been able to do that in their papers published in good journals. Now, using still the hourglass model, you continue to narrow the focus of the specific research being reported, for example, in the method section, and then the results. So it means that if need be, counting words or maybe the size of how many papers you must have or pages, compared to the introduction and the discussion, the methods should be relatively smaller compared to the other two, as well as results being smaller relative to the other two. Now, when it comes to the discussion, you now have to begin with comments about the specific research and connect the findings to the wider literature in the field, from the narrow to the wider. Now, I'll be explaining how this can be done. It means, therefore, that you first refer to the larger scientific area under study, then narrowing the focus to the specific study being reported, and then broadening the comments to include the larger scientific community again. It means that the discussion at the bottom serves as an inverse commentary on the introduction. So you can see that the discussion begins narrowly, summarize the results, then broadly communicate to the wider community, especially when we are talking about literature and then the theory, in a way that will lead you to some conclusions or what we may call implications. Now, leaving that aside for now, what about if we view the research paper as a conversation? Now, as a conversation, now, you may notice every time you get a research paper published, you may wish to check that research paper against these two positions and see where that paper fits or how the researcher approached the write-up of the research paper. So at the conversation, three important things can be made in the introduction section. The first thing is that you want to tell someone that there is an area of study that we, peers who read this journal. Now, when I say peers who read this journal, you must, before you start to write your paper to be published, you need to focus on the journal you wish to publish in. That is important because each journal has a specific focus. Journals focus on certain areas, they focus on certain theories, they have different writing styles, etc. So it is important that there is an area you have identified and the peers who read the journal you have chosen agree is important. So that is the first point that is important in a conversation when you are dealing with the introduction. Then next, you tell the reader that there are certain things that are known about that area of study. And I can show you that I know about that prior work. So that suggests that you need to have a Sanskrit review of literature, and that summary of the literature is what you are supposed to put in that point number 2. And once you do that, it tells us how much is known so far about the area you are trying to study. The third point in the introduction that must appear is that you must be able to tell us that there is still something about this that we do not know. And most of the time we talk about gap or gaps. Now, usually the existence of a gap is presented as the motivation for the study. Now, this third point is crucial because it is what makes a research paper potentially publishable. However, that will not make it 100% publishable, especially if the research question is not clear. I will now say that this third point gives us what we call the motivation question, which actually makes the research consequential. And then there is the research question, which is now the focus of your analysis. It is usually the issue on which you will provide evidence. So, most of the well-known journals, you will find that these two, the motivation question and the research question, must appear separate, however where they have been put in the introduction. But then later linked, they must be connected at some time. And that connection must be explained in the introduction. So in the logic of the conversation, not the hourglass now, the researcher fills the gap by performing the particular research that is presented in this research paper. There is therefore typically an overt statement of the purpose of the paper. So it is very rare to find that a very well-written paper does not state the purpose of the paper, of the journal, or of the paper in the introduction. Very rare. If you do it, at least the reviewer will put it out, will bring it out and say the purpose of the paper is not well stated or it is obscured. Because it is that purpose of the paper that will trigger other things. For example, the methodology and then the results. So most of the time, for example, in the PhD, usually that purpose of the paper is usually the purpose of the study, at least from the East African region where I come from. And in the statement of purpose, it is clear that you, the researcher or the writer, is about to make a new contribution in the field of knowledge through the work presented in the paper. So that's when we are now presenting the introduction and the conversation. In this way, the introduction may be analyzed through a move structure. And the first move usually is that you need to establish a research territory, and I will be giving the words they normally use. Now, in move 2, you establish a niche. Now, a niche is a context where a particular piece of research makes particularly good sense. Now, in move 3, you occupy that niche. And now let's look at examples of how researchers who later become writers make these moves in the introduction. For example, in move 1, you hear people say, a precise chronological framework is crucial for. He has made a move. Or you could say, a fundamental question in the study of is the problem of. So that's a move. you are signposting the reader that broader area you are going to, or the characterization of, is of great importance, since so these and similar other statements signify that you are making the first move as a researcher who is trying to write a journal article. In move 2, you will hear such words, you will read such words like, unfortunately, many lack. Or, why it has been shown that the basis for whatever remains largely unknown. However, or it is of great interest to study whether literature is known about these. Now, you need to relate these moves, what I've just said here about the 3 points that are made in the introduction section. Now, in move 3, examples could include, in this study, we employed several analytical techniques. We obtained, in addition, we report. Alternatively, we propose that. Here we present examples of such features. Or a key step in understanding is to understand this goal, this is the goal of the paper, whatever we focus on here. And as you can see, this is an overt kind of thing that gives you the purpose of the study, where we say we therefore propose. Now, notice this language. I'm using the word we here, but most journals do not like this kind of third person or whatever. Most of the times you may say this paper proposes an approach, or this article proposes, or in this article it is proposed, rather than using we. But depending on what level in the research ladder.
Can I interrupt, Professor? You have 10 minutes to go.
10, all right, I will be done. Now, how do you now write an effective introduction? Given what I've said, it is important to emulate well-respected research papers. So if you are a reader or a researcher, it is important you go to those top-notch journal articles or journals from where you read and be able to understand what is expected of you. You may not hit that level at that stage, but I always use the phrase that aim for the moon. Even if you fail to hit the moon, you'll be among the stars. So if you are reading a 4-star journal articles, maybe you could be able to publish in a 3-star journal. Now, use the hourglass image and idea of being part of a conversation as your template, and write through 3 moves, where as an hourglass, the content narrows from establishing the importance of the area of study and background about the field, specifying the purpose and focus of the present research. At the conversation, you need to establish your credibility to speak about the research, indicating that you know what the important issues in the area are, what has been said about them, and you can identify a significant issue that still needs to be addressed. And you need to state how you address that issue. In the introduction, you may also include how the rest of the paper may be organized. This tends to have a complete section known as the introduction in a well-written article. Now, the materials and methods section, as part of the conversation, it establishes that the researcher did the research credibly. It should demonstrate that the researcher knows the procedures that are acceptable for obtaining evidence in the field, and that those procedures were performed properly. Where you were faced with decisions regarding available procedures, those decisions were made for appropriate reasons, and where modifications were made to accepted procedures, they were noted and were done properly. That way, the reader is assured that the findings that are reported later can be trusted, and the replication of the work is possible. Now, the results section, if you take it as part of a conversation, it tells the reader that something interesting was found as a result of careful methods that were implemented. Now, the author in this section needs to highlight the results that are interesting and help the reader to recognize what is important. Much of the time, what we do, everything that the computer gives us, we tend to put it in the what? In the results section, or we pick everything we put in our PhD work or book, and we put it in the research article to be sent to a journal for review. Much of the time, you will get a problem in terms of, because journals do not always have enough space to accommodate everything. So it is important, and even readers do not have time. So it is important that you highlight those results that are interesting and will help the reader to recognize what is important. How do you do it? What do my results say? Usually in 2 sentences. In the results section, you must tell us what those results say, what they mean, and what conclusions can be drawn from these results. Who needs to know about these results? And usually, you need to be careful of the specific audience of your paper. As has been heard, if you are writing a policy paper, then you must be cognizant of what results they may need to hear or to see, and how you should actually put those results, how they should be written. Why do they need to know? In other words, what contribution will the results make to the ongoing work in the field? Or what will other researchers be missing if they don't read this paper? Now, try to answer those questions in the research section. For example, results normally highlight the data. You can note trends, for example, or regularities in the data, or separate more important from less important information as given by the results, and then comment on the data. Some words that emphasize highlights in the data include the following. For example, you could say of interest, great interest are, there was clearly no effect of. When you read these good papers, you will find these words. There is a useful property that is not included in other schemes. If you are looking at those schemes in the what? In the results, indicating that features other than shape, whatever, certainly play a role. Or you could say, from figure this, it is obvious that there is a substantial individual variability, etc. Some words may also direct the reader to the results that are not worthy. For example, you could say, as can be seen in figure that, the 2 curves are very similar. Or, as can be seen in figure that, the 2 curves are not severely different. So, the author might identify, the author might identify the curves as being largely similar or largely different. Now, in doing so, you are trying to indicate the preferred interpretation, and then the latter explanation, what produced such similar or divergent results, will be taken up in the discussion section. So what is the discussion now? This presents the new contribution in the field. Now, when thinking of contributing to a conversation, for example, this section explains what the findings mean and how they alter what was known before. So notice that if you are a positivist, for example, normally positivism goes hand in hand by, first of all, please specifying the hypothesis to be tested, which means the hypothesis is simply a belief. As you have read literature, the theory, you tend to form beliefs, which we tend to call hypotheses. Now, the results now return what is now known to be true, and that is now the what? the knowledge, which we know, knowledge which is known to be true. Now, when considering the shape of the research paper, the discussion serves almost as the mirror of the introduction. Now, recall in the introduction, we said the area of study is important. We know certain things about it, but there's a gap. I am going to fill it in this manner. That's what the hourglass will tell us. And also even the other 3 points I talked about. But in the discussion, you are supposed to summarize major findings, revise previous sections, summarize key results, explain the implications. Now, by revisiting previous sections, I mean, go back to your results and summarize what you found. For example, one nascent way of, if you are a novice, to do this is look at your hypotheses, if you are a positivist, and see which ones were accepted or which were rejected or which ones were rejected by your results. And then explain the implications of these. And the explanation of the implication of this depends on how, of course, whether you have a stronger grasp of your literature review and theory. Because these implications normally are on theory, the practice, maybe even implications on methodology, and so on. Indeed, the central element of this section is making claims about the findings. So ladies and gentlemen, if you try to do this in a research paper, as you begin to see, this seems to be different from the way we organize our PhD thesis or theses. So you must now unlearn that when you are trying to write a research paper. And this one I have found to be useful for me, and I'm also still learning from my friends, my colleagues. Yeah, many of them are in this room. So they have been telling me that this is how we do it. And even when I send my work for maybe review, maybe reading through or etc., they always make comments about these areas. And I find they always fit within those 4 sections. Now, how do we discuss results? It is in terms of similarity, contrast, and extension with findings and explanations in the published literature. The specific findings are linked to larger literature and so broadening the scope of findings. Then the implications of this new knowledge for the field are presented. In some cases, researchers take a claim to the further research. And this is where we say the content in this section conceptually broadens out. So that's why a complete research paper should try, if it is possible, to come up with areas of further research. What is this that you may not have done, or what are the limitations of their work, which next researchers could potentially alleviate? Those limitations could actually be overcome by previous researchers, or there is something you felt along the way you should have done and you didn't do, and now you want other researchers to take it on. That way you are broadening up and you are communicating to a wider scientific community for further theory development, theory testing, and so on. Now, as this section is typified by claim making, some questions need to be reflected on. How important are the findings? How definitive are they? How certain is the researcher of the interpretation or explanation of the findings? These questions are answered through the level of claims that the author uses concerning the work. Now, quite often, if you are reading these top-notch journals, you would see the words they use in claims, in making claims. And some of these words differ from what we would use. For example, if it was me writing, and I'm writing to a young journal, maybe a 1-star journal or a 2-star journal, etc. Now, some of these claims we make, how strong are you making the claim, depends on such words you are using. For example, if you want a probability, certainly, likely, possible, may, could, might. These are the words you may use if you are thinking that there is a probability that your results would mean this, or generalization, you could say most cases, majorly, sometimes, apart from this instance, or you can distance yourself and you say appears to have occurred because, seems to have, it may be said, you know. Sometimes the verbs you use, you can use indicate, establish, suggest. So these words, which we are reading these articles, in the discussion section, you will find these words and phrases being used. And when you see them being used, they signpost you that the author now is at the level of making a claim. So the conclusion is very critical, and it should bring the reader back to your work and leads to recommendations. Now, what is the underlying story of a potentially publishable paper? It will always go like this. If you can fit in this, this is what I think, maybe your work can be published. There is an important area of study and some things that we know about it, and there are some things that we know about it, but there is something that we do not know. I will fill that gap with this study. I gathered data in a credible manner, and this is what the data show. Based on this data, we now know this thing or things you have the care and thoughtfulness I put into the study design and the findings relationships with the relevant research of others. You can use now these ideas as the basis for further conversations in unit within this kind of words, as indicated by Karen Englander in 2014. I must also say that this work has been largely informed by my kind of experience, but also largely borrows from the work of Karen Englander. And you can always look for this book in seeing how you can actually write a research paper capable of being published. I want to thank you for listening as that time is going on. I would have shared some articles to see how the moves have been made, different journal articles, but all you need to do, just get a very good journal, the Accounting Forum, Accounting Organizations and Society, the AAA journal, etc., and see how those moves are made from various papers published by those groups. Thank you very much. Over to you, moderator.
Thank you very much, Professor, for elaborately presenting how to publish your PhD work. We wouldn't have had a better person than you to do this. I've checked in the chat room and I have not seen any question as yet, but most of the comments in there, they're appreciating your work for elaborately presenting this afternoon. Thank you so much. Our PhD students still on the journey. This is a very, very useful presentation to you to focus, more especially that it's a requirement for you to, more especially for the students from Uganda or East Africa. It's a requirement for you to publish before you graduate. The use of the hourglass image and the conversation have been very key in summarizing everything that you need to follow in publishing your work, coming up with a research paper, and focusing also on which journal you want to publish in, your purpose of your research, and what conversation or new contribution you would like to bring up. I've not seen any questions as such, but if you have any comments to make, please, you can put up your hand for the professor to respond in a few minutes. We have 2 minutes to do this.
Okay, if there's no other questions, I'd like to make a comment.
Yes, please. Please go ahead, Professor.
Okay, just thanks. That was a great presentation. Something I think that's important though is it's no accident that some departments invariably produce a lot of the best research papers. And it isn't because the people are cleverer or anything like that. They often have very good internal processes of working on a paper. So before you publish, it's very important that you present it in informal seminars in your own department, perhaps immediate workshops in your locality with people interested in your research, getting as much comments and feedback as possible, however hurtful it might appear at the time, and then eventually, they take it to conferences, such as the African Accounting Association conferences more generally. So getting a paper to the standards that's required in a good journal is all about process as well as content. I mean, the top researchers will very rarely submit a paper that they've written without having extensive feedback from other people in the area. That's all.
Thank you for that contribution, Professor. Any other comments or additional contribution to the presentation?
Goretti, thank you.
Yes.
I think usually at PhD level, the problem is, my problem was I wanted to graduate, yet the other supervisor wanted me to do quality research. So we found ourselves like pulling ropes. You feel you want really to graduate, and the other supervisor is saying, no, we need to do a quality paper, even if you graduate maybe next year. I think Stephen has to throw more light on that. How does a student balance between having a quality paper at the same time, maybe graduating on time? Thank you.
I think this is, as you have heard from Professor Trevor, as you saw, today's talk was largely about the structure of the research paper that is capable of being accepted for publication. But there's a lot that goes in publications. And just as Professor Trevor said, one of which you must present your work to very many different audiences so that you can also get some feedback from that. Now, in the modus operandi of most East African universities, you tend to see that if you are restricted to 3 years to finish your PhD, when a student, and that pressure has led students to go to what is known as predatory journals to publish their work. So as a result, our PhD students have been massacring their PhDs. Because once you have published your work in a predatory journal, you will never retrieve it back for publication elsewhere. If you are a good supervisor, it is important you insist that the student does quality work so that after a PhD, this student doesn't regret seeing a journal article she published from a highly rigorous exercise of a PhD, and that work was published in, I would say, quote, in a stupid journal where you get ashamed having published there. So for me, I would think it needs to be a policy issue, a policy shift from the East African region to see whether this thing of requiring a student graduating in 3 years' time to publish a journal article in very good journals. And this is a major problem of all African whatever universities, excepting maybe South Africa and maybe Egypt. It doesn't mean that our students actually don't do good PhDs, but their theories are never published in very well-respected journals because there is always a rush to publish. So if a student comes to me and according to my own capability, I would require that that student tries at least to publish the work in at least a ranked journal, not these other journals which don't have even any rank. So sorry, but I know it is in East Africa, it could be a debate at another level. And I think since there are some officials from these universities, I hear heads of departments, you have had, probably this can lead to a policy shift. Is it really fair for a student to publish in 3 years after doing all the work and he has already discussed and concluded his PhD and a thesis, and is able to publish in accounting organizations and society journal, which may require, for example, the review process could take another 3 years or even more. So how are you going to graduate in 3 years when the review process is going to take 3 years after you have finished your PhD? So the shortcut has been that what students normally do, as they are discussing their work, they are also trying to write the paper. And quite often, when you receive feedback from the reviewers or you are presenting in other audiences like AAFA, that feedback helps you in improving your PhD. So sometimes the student can have an advantage of trying to publish his work along with the PhD study. But the limitation is always at what point in time should you send your paper to a journal? Is it after you have just gotten results and start writing papers, or it is when you have engaged very thoroughly with your discussion and you are now able to see what claims you wish to publish? If you have not developed those claims carefully, you probably will never publish in one of the best journals. And that is a problem personally I have faced, and so are others in the East African region.
Thank you very much, Professor Stephen. This cannot end. We can go on and on, but we've overrun our time. So I would like to thank you once again, and I would like to hand over back to Dr. Irene. Dr. Irene.
Thank you so much, Dr. Goretti. Someone has something to say, that is Dr. Inka. Dr. Inka, I'm giving you 1 minute because of time.
Oh, all right, thank you, Irene. I think Professor Stephen mentioned the key thing I wanted to add, which is that balance between, keeping PhD students and the quality of the publication. I appreciate the fact that there's an intention to get theses off the shelf. Most theses die natural death if you don't publish them. But again, if you're looking at quality, it takes time. So I'm not saying that East Africa should change their way of running PhD, but I think it's something you want to give a good, thought through to see, well, is it going to be worth it keeping a PhD? Say, supposing they never publish in 5 years, what are you going to do? They never graduate then. And in principle, if we look at the PhD as still one component of learning, if students have demonstrated the primary skill, you need to show that you can do good research and quality is going. I think there's a juggle there. So it's not something you want to answer in a hurry, but I mean, there are so many models around. I myself, I had, papers coming out of the thesis before it's completed, but that is not every day's approach from different schools and different ways of doing it. So my humble thoughts, you don't have to take them on board, but just something to think about the career of the students as well as the policies that are implemented. Thank you. Sorry if I'm still taking your time.
Thank you so much. I invite Professor Tevin to make some remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. I will not be long. I think we're coming to the end, and what we're going to do afterwards is we'll have a little bit of a open discussions in breakout rooms for those who are still here and would like to stay. I mean, obviously we're reaching the end of the seminar, but at the same time we want to catch up with as many as you as possible, understand where things, where we might be able to support or help more specifically, or advise more separately. So if you are not in a hurry, please stay on, and we'll have a chance to discuss in a more informal settings with speakers. But in terms of conclusion, I just want to say thank you very much for all the inputs. The questions are still coming in, and also the inputs of all our speakers. This was a fantastic, I think, very interesting, very good, and very useful, I think, for benefit of students and discussions. I will conclude is in relation to AAFA. There was a couple of questions about membership. You can join AAFA as a member. There is a membership scheme in place, and that allows you to get access to resources and other information that we regularly dispense to all members. And also in due course, we'll also give you access to particular seminars at differential rates. So we will send tomorrow or by also about all the attachments, all the documents, the presentation slides, for example, for today. But at the same time, we will also communicate how to join and how to become a member of AAFA. So I can only hope and obviously encourage you to join us and join a wider community of senior and junior colleagues and students, and in Africa, outside Africa, and towards improving our community and improving the capacity of our researchers to make a change in various aspects of Africa. I can also commend Professor Stephen for his very good presentation on the journal, on the African Accounting and Finance Journal. We are a journal which is we are here and review your, and so therefore we encourage you, I think, strongly to submit papers to the journal for consideration after review and so on and so forth. Okay, I think nothing else to say, Irene, other than to obviously thank you and all the members of the organizing committee of this seminar. Very well done, very well organized, and all the members from the different universities, led by yourself and other colleagues, for that, and I appreciate that very much. Irene, back to you.
Thank you. I also pass a vote of thanks to the presenters. All the presenters, thank you for honoring our invitation. I also pass a vote of thanks to the different universities from East Africa, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and other African countries, and also other members from the diaspora for attending. I also thank our members of MOBS management. I circulated the information, I've seen them on board, the various deans and the heads of departments, the graduate school. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much, members. We shall be having more events being organized, and we shall be calling upon you to attend. Thank you so much. We are going to the breakout sessions where we are going to interact, and then after that, we shall be free to leave. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you.
David, do you want to organize this, please?
Oh, sorry, Steven, I handed the hosting rights to you. You can do that.
Well, no, I would prefer to do before you leave.
Okay, you can give me back.
I give you back,
All right.
and then you can do that. Okay.
Okay, so we are going to have some breakout rooms where we can carry on the networking. So the meeting is not ended. You can get into the room and
get out of
you get to discuss. So I'm going to create 5 rooms. And then I don't know which option works better. Steven, do we do it automatically or?
Let's go automatically to make it easier.
Automatic. All right, very good. So 5 rooms open. You'll find yourself in a room. Let's carry on with the conversations. Thank you.